Before the black sand of Iwo Jima became a symbol of sacrifice, it was simply another volcanic island in the Pacific. Bare, jagged, and hostile, it rose from the ocean like a fortress. For the Japanese, Iwo Jima was not just land. It was a shield for the homeland, an early warning post standing between American bombers and Tokyo itself. By early 1945, Japan knew the war was turning against them. Their fleets were shattered, their skies increasingly controlled by American aircraft. But on the ground, they prepared to fight differently. No more banzai charges. No reckless attacks. On Iwo Jima, they would fight underground, unseen, and until the last breath. General Tadamaki Kurabayashi transformed the island into a nightmare. More than 11 miles of tunnels connected hundreds of bunkers, pillboxes, and artillery positions. Each bunker was reinforced with steel, concrete, and volcanic rock. Each one was designed to survive naval bombardment and erupt with gunfire the moment American Marines stepped forward. When U.S. Marines landed on February 19, 1945, they expected resistance. What they did not expect was silence. For long minutes, the beach was quiet. No gunfire, no explosions, just the sound of boots sinking into soft volcanic ash. Then, as if the island itself had awakened, the bunkers opened fire. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery ripped into the landing waves. Men fell where they stood. Tanks burned. Progress stopped almost instantly. Every yard forward cost blood. The Japanese bunkers were nearly invisible, camouflaged into slopes and ridges. Their firing slits were narrow, angled, and deadly. Traditional weapons struggled to neutralize them. Grenades bounced off reinforced entrances. Rifle fire was useless. Even tank shells often failed to fully collapse them. That was when the flamethrowers moved forward. Flamethrower operators were among the most dangerous jobs in the Marine Corps. They carried tanks of volatile fuel on their backs, making them prime targets. Japanese defenders knew this. Snipers specifically hunted them. Machine gunners prioritized them. To carry a flamethrower on Iwo Jima was to walk with death inches away. One Marine. His name would later be recorded in after-action reports. But on that day, he was simply another figure moving through smoke and fire, advanced toward a ridge riddled with enemy bunkers. 7 of them, each one commanding fields of fire that pinned down entire platoons. For hours. That was all the time it would take for one man, armed with a flamethrower, to change the course of that section of the battlefield. The first bunker resisted grenades and small arms. Its embrasure spat machine gun fire nonstop. Marines hugged the ground, unable to advance. Crawling forward through ash and debris, the flamethrower Marine reached the firing slit. He stood, exposed, and unleashed a stream of fire into the opening. Flames poured inside. Within seconds, the gun fell silent. He did not stop. The second bunker was set back, its entrance protected by overlapping fire from another position. Again, the Marine advanced under cover of smoke and suppressive fire. Again, he fired into the bunker, the fuel igniting everything inside. Oxygen, ammunition, fear. Screams echoed briefly. Then nothing. One by one, he moved forward. Each bunker was a fortress. Each required a different approach. Some were hit through firing slits. Others through rear entrances hidden behind ridges. Japanese soldiers emerged from tunnels only to be met with fire before they could mount a counterattack. By the third bunker, Japanese defenders realized what was happening. Rifle fire intensified. Bullets snapped past the Marine's head. Shrapnel tore through the air. Still, he advanced. The flamethrower roared again. By the fourth bunker, the surrounding ground was littered with spent casings, burned equipment, and the scorched remains of defensive positions that had once halted an entire company. Time blurred. The island shook with explosions. Smoke hung thick in the air. The Marine refueled, repositioned, and attacked again. By the fifth and sixth bunkers, resistance began to collapse. Japanese defenders abandoned firing positions, retreating deeper into tunnels, only to be cut off by fire sealing exits behind them. The seventh bunker fell, just as the others had. For hours, 7 bunkers destroyed. An entire defensive network erased by one man moving forward while others could not. When the smoke cleared, Marines around him realized what had happened. What had taken days in other sectors had been accomplished in a single afternoon. The ridge that had pinned them down was silent. For the Japanese defenders who survived elsewhere on the island, word spread quickly. American flamethrowers were not just weapons. They were terror itself, able to reach into the earth and turn the tunnels they trusted into burning traps. On Iwo Jima, courage was measured not only in how long a man survived, but in how far he advanced despite knowing what waited for him. And for one Marine, those 4 hours became a moment that stunned an enemy who believed their bunkers were unbreakable. As the hours passed on Iwo Jima, the Japanese command realized something was terribly wrong. Their defensive doctrine depended on time. Every bunker was meant to delay, bleed, and exhaust the Americans inch by inch. What they did not anticipate was the psychological shock of fire moving freely through positions once thought invulnerable. The flamethrower Marine was no longer just destroying bunkers. He was breaking the logic of the entire defense system. Japanese soldiers had been trained to endure bombardment. They had survived naval shells, aerial bombs, and artillery barges by retreating underground. But fire was different. It followed them. It consumed oxygen. It turned tunnels into furnaces. And it erased the one advantage they believed could never be taken from them: protection. In several bunkers, defenders waited until the last possible second to open fire, believing concealment would save them. Instead, concealment trapped them. When the flames entered, there was nowhere to run. Ammunition cooked off. Wooden supports ignited. Thick black smoke choked every tunnel branch. Some Japanese soldiers tried to counterattack from hidden exits. Others rushed out with rifles or bayonets, desperate to escape the heat behind them. Most were cut down before they reached open ground. American Marines, watching this unfold, were stunned in a different way. They'd been pinned down for days by positions that refused to die. Now, they were seeing bunkers neutralized one after another. Momentum, something painfully rare on Iwo Jima, finally returned. The flamethrower Marine did not advance recklessly. Each movement was deliberate. He waited for covering fire. He studied terrain. He approached from angles that minimized exposure. Experience, training, and instinct guided him forward. Every few minutes, the roar of the flamethrower echoed across the ridge. Japanese officers observing from deeper positions understood the danger immediately. Flamethrowers could not be allowed to reach critical tunnel intersections. Orders were given to prioritize them at all costs. Snipers repositioned. Machine guns shifted their arcs. Mortar fire began targeting likely approach routes. The Marine felt it instantly. Bullets struck the ground around him. Volcanic ash exploded upward with each impact. Shrapnel cut through the smoke. Yet he continued to move, knowing that hesitation meant more Marines dying behind him. At one bunker, the entrance was blocked by debris from earlier shelling. Grenades had failed to clear it. Rifle fire was useless. The Marine climbed onto the bunker roof under fire, found a ventilation opening barely wide enough, and fired directly into it. The result was immediate. Flames poured downward. Smoke burst from every crack. Within moments, firing from connected bunkers ceased as well, proof that the tunnels were linked far more deeply than the defenders had admitted. This was the turning point. What began as the destruction of isolated bunkers revealed the weakness of the entire underground network. Once fire entered one node, it spread through adjacent passages, forcing defenders to abandon positions that had not yet been directly attacked. Japanese resistance in that sector collapsed faster than anyone expected. For American commanders, this confirmed a grim truth. Flamethrowers were not optional tools. They were essential. Without them, Iwo Jima could cost far more lives than anyone was prepared to accept. For the Japanese, it was a realization filled with horror. Their strongest fortifications were now liabilities. Every tunnel was a potential death trap. Every bunker, a sealed coffin waiting for fire. As night approached, The ridge, once bristling with gunfire, fell silent. Smoke drifted upward into the darkening sky. Burned metal glowed faintly in the ash. Marines regrouped, exhausted, shaken, but alive. Somewhere beneath the island, Japanese defenders waited in silence, listening for footsteps, knowing now that fire could reach them anywhere. And the man with the flamethrower prepared to move again, because on Iwo Jima, stopping meant surrendering ground back to an enemy who never stopped watching. By the end of those 4 hours, the battlefield around the Marine had changed completely. What had begun as a slow, bloody crawl across volcanic ash had turned into a sudden rupture in the Japanese defensive line. 7 bunkers were no longer firing. Entire sections of tunnel networks had gone silent. This was not how Iwo Jima was supposed to unfold. Japanese planners had expected the Americans to advance in fragments, paying for every yard with casualties. They believed their underground defenses would outlast morale, ammunition, and patience. Instead, one man with a flamethrower had accelerated what weeks of bombardment had failed to achieve. Inside surviving Japanese positions, fear spread faster than orders. Soldiers whispered about fire moving through the tunnels like a living thing. Some spoke of heat so intense it peeled paint from steel and warped rifle barrels. Others described smoke that robbed men of strength before flames ever touched them. For many defenders, the psychological battle was already lost. American Marines advancing behind the cleared bunkers felt it too. Resistance weakened. Machine gun fire became sporadic. Counterattacks lacked coordination. The enemy was still there, still dangerous, but no longer unbreakable. The flamethrower Marine was physically drained. The weapon was heavy. The fuel tanks pressed painfully into his back. His protective mask was smeared with ash and sweat. Every breath burned his lungs. Yet he remained standing because stopping meant giving the defenders time to recover. Each bunker destroyed was not just an enemy position eliminated. It was lives saved. Marines who would not have to crawl forward under crossfire. Medics who would not be pulling wounded men from open ground. Platoons that could move instead of being pinned in place. Commanders took note. Reports moved quickly up the chain. Flamethrowers were being reassigned. Assault plans were adjusted. What one Marine had proven in 4 hours would shape the rest of the battle. On the Japanese side, officers faced an impossible dilemma. To stay underground invited fire. To surface invited bullets. The very design, meant to ensure survival, had become a trap with no safe exit. As darkness settled over Iwo Jima, the ridge bore scars that would never fade. Blackened concrete, twisted metal, openings still breathing smoke hours after the fighting stopped. The ground itself seemed scorched by what had passed over it. That night, Marines dug in among positions that had once tried to kill them. They spoke quietly about what they had seen, about the courage it took to walk toward gunfire carrying fire itself, about the cost of such bravery. The man who had destroyed 7 bunkers did not celebrate. He cleaned his weapon. He checked his fuel. He rested where he could, because dawn would bring new resistance, new tunnels, and the same unforgiving ground. When the sun rose again over Iwo Jima, the battlefield looked unchanged to an outsider. The same black volcanic sand, the same broken ridges, the same smoke drifting low across the island. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Japanese defenses were still intact on paper. Thousands of soldiers remained hidden underground. Ammunition stocks were not yet exhausted. Command structures still existed. Yet something critical had been lost during the previous day. Certainty. The defenders now understood that no bunker was truly safe. For years, Japanese military doctrine had taught that fortifications were extensions of the soldier's body. Concrete, steel, and earth were meant to absorb the enemy's firepower and bleed his will to attack. At Iwo Jima, those beliefs had already begun to crack. The flamethrower attacks changed the equation entirely. Fire did not respect angles. It did not care about armor thickness. It flowed, spread, and consumed oxygen itself. Tunnels that once felt secure now became suffocating traps. Escape routes turned into chimneys of smoke and heat. Inside the underground network, men faced impossible choices. stay below and risk burning alive, or surface into a storm of American rifles and artillery. Discipline began to erode, not because of cowardice, but because survival instincts overwhelmed doctrine. American commanders pressed the advantage. Flamethrower teams were moved forward deliberately. They were no longer treated as rare specialists, but as essential tools for cracking hardened defenses. Infantry units adjusted their movements, advancing more aggressively once bunkers were neutralized. The rhythm of the battle changed. Instead of long stalemates at every ridge, breakthroughs began to occur in bursts. A bunker would fall, then two, then an entire section would collapse in minutes. Each success created momentum, and momentum was something the Japanese defenders could not replace. For the Marines on the ground, fear still existed, but it was now shared. The enemy was afraid too. That knowledge mattered. Men advanced knowing that resistance could be broken, not just endured. They began to believe that the island could actually be taken, that Iwo Jima was not an endless graveyard but a battlefield with an endpoint. The Marine with the flamethrower was no longer alone in spirit. Others followed his example, stepping forward despite exhaustion and terror, understanding that decisive action shortened the battle for everyone. Above all, the lesson was clear. Technology combined with individual courage had rewritten the rules of the fight. What began as one man destroying 7 bunkers was now reshaping the entire campaign. And as American forces pushed deeper into the island, the Japanese defenders realized a devastating truth. Iwo Jima was no longer a fortress. It was becoming a tomb. As the battle dragged into its next phase, the Japanese defense began to fracture in ways no staff officer could fully control. The underground network that had once been a strength now worked against its defenders. Communication lines were severed by fire and collapse. Units became isolated, sometimes just meters apart, yet completely cut off from one another. Orders no longer flowed. Coordination disappeared. Inside the tunnels, heat lingered long after the flames were gone. Smoke clung to the air, turning every breath into pain. Men rationed oxygen without realizing it, growing weaker by the hour. Some lost consciousness without ever seeing an American soldier. Psychological pressure became as lethal as bullets. Japanese troops had been trained to fight to the last man, but that doctrine assumed a recognizable enemy. Rifles, grenades, artillery, flamethrowers shattered that expectation. They erased the sense of control that discipline depended on. Reports filtered upward of entire positions going silent. Bunkers that had been counted as operational simply vanished from the battlefield map. Commanders began to realize that their carefully planned defensive belts were collapsing unevenly, unpredictably. On the American side, the effect was immediate. Infantry units advanced with growing confidence, coordinating closely with engineers and flamethrower teams. Instead of frontal assaults, they executed rapid, targeted strikes. Once a strong point was neutralized, Marines moved past it without hesitation, leaving cleanup to follow on units. Time now favored the attackers. Each hour reduced Japanese options. Ammunition stocks remained, but the ability to use them effectively did not. Rifles and machine guns were useless if their crews were trapped underground or forced to abandon positions under fire and heat. Some Japanese soldiers attempted counterattacks, emerging suddenly from tunnels to strike Marine lines. But these attacks were fragmented and desperate. Without surprise or mass, they were cut down quickly. Others chose to remain hidden, hoping the Americans would bypass them entirely. But the systematic clearing operations left no room for survival through invisibility. Every bunker was investigated. Every tunnel entrance was probed. The battlefield no longer belonged to those who waited. It belonged to those who acted. For the Marines, exhaustion was absolute. Sleep came in minutes, not hours. Hands shook from fatigue and adrenaline. Yet the knowledge that progress was real kept them moving forward. For the Japanese defenders, the realization was far darker. They were not dying for time. They were dying without changing the outcome. By the end of this phase, The question was no longer whether Iwo Jima would fall, but how much suffering would occur before the inevitable end arrived. By the final hours of the battle, the island no longer resembled a battlefield. It was a scar, blackened earth, shattered concrete, collapsed tunnels, and the remains of positions that had once been considered unbreakable. What had begun as a fortress had been reduced to isolated pockets of resistance, fighting without coordination, without hope, and without illusion. For the Japanese defenders, the reality had become unmistakable. No counteroffensive would come. No tactical reversal was possible. No sacrifice could change the outcome. Many continued to fight anyway, not because victory was achievable, but because surrender had never been part of their world. Their resistance, once methodical and disciplined, now became personal and final. Isolated soldiers waited in darkness, listening for footsteps, knowing exactly how the encounter would end. For the Marines, victory carried no sense of celebration. Each bunker destroyed meant lives lost on both sides. Each advance revealed the cost of every yard gained. The island was taken, but it was taken slowly, painfully, and with a price that could not be measured in maps or reports. And yet, strategically, Iwo Jima changed the war. The island became an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Pacific. American fighters now escorted bombers deeper into Japan. Damaged planes landed where they once would have fallen into the sea. Tens of thousands of airmen owed their lives to the ground paid for in blood. What one Marine accomplished in those 4 hours was not just the destruction of 7 bunkers. It was the breaking of a defensive concept, a realization that even the most elaborate fortifications could be defeated by adaptability, coordination, and relentless pressure. That no underground fortress could survive once its defenders lost control of time, space, and initiative. For Japan, Iwo Jima marked the beginning of the end of territorial defense. For America, it was proof that the Pacific War would be won not by single battles, but by endurance, measured in days, hours, and individuals who pushed forward when exhaustion said stop. Long after the guns fell silent, the island remained quiet, but its silence carried meaning. It spoke of the moment when shock replaced certainty, when preparation failed against innovation, and when courage, on both sides, met an outcome that history would never forget. Iwo Jima did not end the war, but ensured how the war would end.